Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's panel on inclusive spaces for aging well. I am Praminder Raina. I'm the scientific director of the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you on behalf of McMaster University and our partners, the University of Birmingham and the Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games. We will begin by giving honor and thanks to Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations as the traditional inhabitants of the lands where McMaster stands. We acknowledge a debt to those who were here before us and to recognize our responsibility as guests to respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land, and to reflect on how we each can do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. Tonight's event is part of a larger celebration of partnership, collaboration, camaraderie, and the capacity for sport to bring us together. As part of the lead up to the 2022 Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, UK, the Queen's Baton will make 74 stops around the world. Today, it has arrived in Hamilton. And along with our guests from Birmingham, it is our pleasure to take this opportunity to come together, vision the ways to build spaces that are inclusive, embrace reconciliation, and enable people of ages to be active and participate in what is important to them. Our panel features 8 speakers from McMaster, other parts of the country, Birmingham, and our local community. And I'm not going to be giving a long, detailed bio of each one of those because that was here a few minutes ago, and you probably have seen that. Our speakers are Mazumder, Leigh Breen, Sophie Geffros, Stu Phillips, Lorrie Gallant, Ned Jenkinson, Brenda Vrkljan, and Jill Axisa. We will hear Western and Indigenous perspectives on aging through the lens of neuroscience, accessible cycling, LGBTQ+, caregiving, wisdom, exercise, and physiology. Together, we can build a greater understanding of the challenges, opportunities, and evidence around enabling healthy, active aging, and how we can design and implement inclusive places and spaces for aging well. I will hand things off now to our first speaker. Robin, please come here.
Well, thank you for having me. Much gratitude to McMaster and everyone at MIRA. So today, in the next 8 minutes, I'll be talking about my perspective on aging and well-being within the community. So I thought I'd start off just by talking about what motivated me to quit my job to do a PhD, against many people's advice not to. But it was really my experience working as a clinician in occupational therapy, as a clinician occupational therapist, working in the urban centers with people with mental illnesses. And I started to recognize how the role that I could play in supporting the well-being of my clients was really not largely, but significantly determined by the urban built environment around them. Social isolation was probably one of the most common issues that my patients experienced. Access to active transportation, libraries, transit, and that I think the gap between the built environment and health was something that frustrated me. So I chose to do my PhD. While I was an occupational therapist, I also got quite involved in the city, and one of the things I did was participate in the mayor's task force to end poverty, and that initiative was really meant to address health within the urban context and recognizing the implications that poverty had on health. And I saw the city, who's in charge of urban infrastructure, as probably one of the key players in promoting well-being. And then lastly, just my own experience with mental health. I've had my own challenges, and I recognized that there were some places in the city that made me feel better, and some places in the city that were aggravating and probably negatively impacting my well-being. So, fundamentally, the core of my research is to understand how our outer world impacts our inner world and how that results in positive well-being. So this is the type of research that I do. You can see on the left there, that's me and the president of the University of Waterloo, who's visiting our lab, so I thought I'd take advantage of the photo op. And he's wearing a VR mask. So I would put people in virtual environments to see how the built environment around them impacted them. And on the right here, you can see a number of physiological measures. So we looked at blood pressure, heart rate variability, and the most, the core measure I used was electrodermal activity, which is the amount that you sweat emotionally on your palms, and is a pretty good indicator of stress. So again, just considering the relationship between stress and well-being. So in my first experiment, we stuck people in environments like this. It looks pretty blocky, it is, but it did produce results. And we built this with a program called Unity. Okay, so here you can see a virtual, a 360 camera view of central London where I did a fellowship. But the implications are really about trying to bring the real world back to the virtual reality setup so that we could have better experimental control and ultimately give us better results in terms of understanding the real world impacts. And as you might have seen there's a tall building. The focus of my PhD was really looking at the aesthetics of the city and how building height would make people feel, particularly their emotional state as measured by their physiology and other measures. So again, trying to use a really applied approach to my research, I looked at how people navigated sidewalks, recognizing that things like sidewalk width can really affect how people feel on a daily basis, and that chronic exposure to that might have some implications on health. So, can this play too? Here you can see a virtual avatar walking up and down a sidewalk, and in this case, we're really looking at how close people walked to this avatar, and we looked at effects on gender and race to see if there are any connections with that as to who might take up more space. And this is one of the other studies that we ran, and I think probably has the most connection to aging and well-being. We took a group of people on a tour of downtown Vancouver, and we were looking at how different locations in the core impacted people's stress. As you can see here, this is actually a electrodermal activity graph mapped onto the route people took. So you could see that at particular places, those spikes are higher, and that's again just an indicator of stress. And alongside with this electrodermal activity measurement, we also looked at social connection, people's desire to meet new friends, environmental stewardship, how safe people felt. And what we found was that locations with green space, a lot of bright colors, and just good designed public space as it pertains to seating, those actually had a significant impact on our well-being measures. So this is me with an EEG cap on, and that measures your brain waves essentially. And here we were looking at how the auditory environment of the city would impact people's attentional abilities. So basically, we would put people on separated bike routes. We'd put them within the traffic, and then shared spaces. And we actually found that the setting did have impacts on people's attentional abilities. And when it comes to aging, I think attention is something that we need to consider. and how the urban environment can really put a lot of stresses on our sensory system and probably be dissuading for some. So that's like a pretty broad overview of the research that I have done, but really the core of it is like, how can we build responsive cities for responsive bodies? When I think about aging well in place, I think about evolution. People are constantly changing. And how can our urban environment be responsive to those changes as opposed to, inhibiting people's ability to explore their communities and do all the things that are required for well-being. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. I've been in Canada for 2 days now, so no excuse for jet lag. Nice to be back in the Hammer. I spent 2 great years working here, so feels like I never went away, which is a good thing, right? Yeah. So I'm a muscle physiologist from Birmingham in the UK, and I'm interested in why we lose muscle when we age and what we can do to stop that process. So muscle is an extremely important organ. It's the largest organ in the body, and around the age of 25, 30, you'll have as much muscle mass as you're ever going to have in life, generally speaking, unless something dramatic changes. Now, muscle's important for a number of different reasons, but effectively, it helps us function and move from place to place, but it also plays a key role in helping to maintain the metabolism and the health of lots of different tissues and organs in the body. As you can see, muscle mass and strength decline slowly from the age of 20 to 30 onwards. Now, some people, this process is quite slow and relatively insipid, and they advance into older age in relatively good function and health, such that they have enough muscle mass and strength that they can live independently, and healthcare costs are relatively low for this person. However, some people follow a steeper trajectory of muscle and strength loss in older age, and these are the people we need to be concerned about. So in some individuals, muscle mass and strength may fall below this disability threshold, somewhere in the 50s to 60s. And it used to be the case that these individuals were often termed as the shortest lived. But due to advances in medicine and healthcare, it's possible that these individuals can spend 20 to 30 years living in poor quality of life with low muscle and strength. And this is an expensive problem, as you can see. I'm not going to go point by point through these figures here. They're not meant to scare anybody, but perhaps the important point to draw your attention to is the figure at the bottom here, that in Europe at least, by 2045, it's predicted that somewhere near 32 million older adults will reach a diagnosis of low muscle mass. And you can appreciate that this places a considerable strain on our healthcare service that we're currently ill-equipped to deal with, and will be in an even worse position in 20 to 30 years' time. The images you can see here depict typical muscle loss or changes in the composition of the thigh with advancing age. So we have a 50-year age gap here. This is not the same individual. This is a healthy 25-year-old and a 75-year-old with the same BMI. And what you're looking at is effectively a cross-section, a bird's eye view look down into the thigh muscles. You can see smaller muscle mass surrounded by this white fatty tissue. And also we get infiltration of fat within and between the muscles as well. And low muscle mass with advancing age is associated with a number of very serious health consequences and illnesses. And also individuals who have low muscle mass tend to do quite poorly when they have these diseases in older age. Inactivity and disease aggravate age-related muscle loss. I've depicted a few examples here, but perhaps one of the biggest concerns is with advancing age, we are predisposed to periods of inactivity and sedentary behavior. We may spend a greater proportion of life in ill health, and this means we're unable to move as much as we could when we were younger. So inactivity is the scourge of older age in many senses. This figure here shows you the typical loss, at least in experimental models that we would use, the typical loss in muscle mass and function that occurs with 7 and also 14 days of bed rest. At the whole body level, in the legs, and also when we look at the function of those muscles as well. So you can see that the legs seem to be quite badly affected by disuse events. We lose muscle very rapidly. It occurs very quickly and plateaus thereafter. But importantly, older adults lose function at a much greater rate. So the loss of muscle mass combined with the loss of strength causes severe impairments in function, and it may be the case that after leaving a period of hospitalization and bed rest, an older person finds himself in much worse functional health, an inability to complete tasks that they could complete before the period of bed rest. In case you're interested in what it looks like, in our hands anyway, 5 days of bed rest typically results in muscle loss that equates to about 5 years of aging. And you'll have heard similar figures reported in the popular media as well. So these are two 500-gram steaks. This is probably the amount of muscle you would lose from each of your thighs in just 5 days of bed rest. And alarmingly, a big issue is that a lot of older adults don't gain these pre-bed rest levels of muscle mass and function back. As we age, it becomes more difficult to gain muscle mass and strength, and so upon discharge from hospital, it's usually the case that older folks don't find themselves back at the same level of muscle mass and strength again. And so it's often seen that older adults enter this vicious cycle of muscle loss, greater predisposition to disease and ill health, more time spent sedentary and in hospital, and the cycle continues. And what I would say is that this figure I present here is probably a best case scenario, because these are data generated in healthy research volunteers that report for a bed rest study. If an older patient enters hospital acutely with critical illness, for example, or with a disease that carries a high inflammatory burden, this scenario is likely to be much worse. Okay, so all the bad news, there is some good news. Ourselves and groups at McMaster and several other teams across the world are advancing the science in this area at quite a rapid rate. So we're starting to understand the mechanisms that drive this muscle loss and strength loss with bed rest and disuse. We're starting to understand at the molecular level what signals become defective and impaired in the muscle. And if we understand the mechanisms, we can start to develop treatments to counteract this. And the front line in treatment is lifestyle intervention. Can we make people move? Can we change nutrition before we give a drug? Access and expertise to physical therapists and rehab is slowly but surely improving. There's greater awareness of the harms of disuse and inactivity on muscle loss and strength in older adults, and so increasing resources being put towards ensuring adequate rehab programs are in place. And finally, there's a big push, certainly in the UK, and the little bit of digging I could do on the data in Canada suggests the same, that patients after elective surgeries are encouraged to be back on their feet quicker and out of hospital quicker as well. So if we want to do a study in real-world patients with 5-6 days of bed rest after a hip or a knee replacement, we can't find them in the UK anymore because they're out of hospital at 2 or 3 days, or that's the goal anyway. So the final take-home points from me before I close, and this is accurate because my watch has just buzzed and told me to move a bit more as well. So get up, stand up and keep moving is the priority. Muscle deconditioning, as you saw, starts very quickly. The first 1 to 2 days you're in bed or you're sitting at home on the couch ill, it's already active, that process. If you ever find yourselves or your friends or your patients, whoever, in hospital, my advice is always get up, get dressed, try not to eat your meal in bed. One of the best things you can do is try to sit at a chair or a table in your clothes as opposed to pajamas. Try and consume a source of protein with each of your main meals, and preferably, if your appetite allows, the snacks that you consume between meals as well. Protein is key. And finally, try and rehab as early as possible before you go to bed, or as soon as possible after discharge. So individuals who know they've got an elective surgery coming up in a few weeks or a few months can already start that rehab process. We call that prehabilitation, training for the stress of bed rest or surgery. And yeah, ensure that you adhere to all your rehab guidelines after you are discharged from hospital. Push the therapist, push your medical practitioner for more. Thank you.
I always joke that the privilege of doing research on LGBT communities is I get to use color on my slides. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sophie Geffros. I'm not an MA candidate, I'm a PhD candidate at McMaster University in the School of Earth, Environment, and Society. I conduct research on 2S LGBTQ+, older adults and caregivers. And I'm going to start tonight by telling you a story. So in 2018, I was a new MA student doing my first ever interview. I was terrified. I was more nervous than I am right now, if you can believe it. It was going to Toronto to meet a man named Roger. He was a retired teacher. He sat down in the coffee shop and started answering my questions, and 10 minutes or so went by, and then he took pity on me, I think. He could sense how nervous I was, and he said, no. You write this down. I'm going to tell you what you need to know, which was great. And then he went on something of a monologue. He had been 19 years old, he explained, when homosexuality was decriminalized in Canada and already embedded in the Toronto underground gay scene. It changed some things, but not enough. In the 1970s, he was the victim of a quite vicious queer bashing that resulted in him being hospitalized for a week. The cops didn't care, and that was something which he was still angry about over 50 years later. Like so many men of his generation, he lost lovers and friends to the AIDS epidemic that left him with a lifelong hatred and fear of hospitals. This man was educated, he was a retired teacher, he didn't have a family doctor. He avoided hospitals at all costs. How could he trust them, after all, given what he had seen them do to his friends and family? I asked him what he thought a good death would be, and he said, not in the hospital, never, with my friends in the sunshine, which I think is something we can all sort of understand. I think about Roger a lot. I think about him when I read statistics that say that 2S LGBTQ+ older adults are dramatically less likely to have family doctors to seek appropriate care for health conditions. When I read statistics that say that they experience earlier onset aging-related frailty, diseases we associate with old age like Alzheimer's and dementia, I think of Roger and the arthritis he had in the hip that never really healed right after the 1970s. Roger's not alone, but he's one of the people who has driven my research since then. So in a 2017 survey of area agencies on aging, this is an American study, but there aren't any in Canada, I'm working on it. They found that just 10% felt they would be able to offer appropriate services to an LGBT older adult patient. 30% said they would advise them to seek services elsewhere. Now, we're left with kind of two options here, right? Either 30% of agencies are institutionally homophobic and transphobic, a possibility I am by no means ruling out, or they meant it kindly, in a sense, that they knew there was nothing they could offer them, and so they would say, no, go somewhere else. That is not a tenable solution for most LGBT older adults, especially those outside major cities. We simply have to do better. I'm now going to take you through a few people who I have interviewed over the last 5 years in the course of my MA and my PhD. The first is Brian. So Brian's partner, Oliver, was diagnosed with prostate cancer 5 years ago. They were legally married, so there should have been fewer barriers to access care and services. It doesn't always work that way, of course. And in fact, they had a terrible time with home health agencies, with sort of sneering and dismissal, including one home health worker who heavily implied that Oliver's cancer was the result of gay sex. The part of this quote that has always stuck with me is that we are too old to still be dealing with this. Linda, 65, is a semi-closeted nurse in Thunder Bay, whose partner is dealing with a terminal illness. Lesbian nurses face significant career penalties for coming out. They are more likely to be disciplined for minor infractions, less likely to be promoted, and more likely to leave their career altogether. The thing from Linda that will always stick with me is that she was lonely, trapped between worlds, none of which was particularly welcoming to her. She's someone who I think about a lot when I think about how we address LGBT older adults and aging well. Deb's a little bit different. She's here for a different reason. So a few years ago, Deb's mother stopped speaking to her when she came out. She was fully disowned until her mother was diagnosed with dementia. Deb had brothers and sisters, but they had families and children, and so it was just understood that Deb, of course, was the person who would care for someone who had been so terribly cruel to her. I include Deb for the reason that to highlight the fact that when we don't proactively design systems for inclusion, the burden and the emotional burden of this ends up falling upon the most marginalized among us. This has always and will be always the case until we fix it. I love Alonzo. So I intended to interview Alonzo's partner, Dave. I was interviewing Dave over Zoom, and Alonzo was from somewhere off screen shouting out corrections to things that Dave would tell me, until finally he joined his husband on the couch and said, "You're getting it wrong, just let me do it." And then he informed me I would be interviewing both of them. I wasn't going to say no. Alonzo, although he's not that old, as you will note, only 68, was already dealing with lung issues and osteoporosis. I mentioned earlier that LGBT older adults deal with earlier onset aging-related frailty, higher rates of dementia, higher rates of cardiovascular and lung disease, among many other things. Some of this can be attributed to sort of higher modifiable risk factors, as we call them, heavier use of tobacco or alcohol. Some of this can be attributed to the compounding effects of what we call minority stress, the psychological stress which is internalized in the body that comes from being marginalized. And some of it we don't understand terribly well yet. The thing that Alonzo said that has always struck with me is this: we didn't plan on growing old because we weren't supposed to grow old. Alonzo himself was also a long-term survivor of HIV. So what do we do about this? Surely there's something. Some things from my research that have been flagged as being particularly important is all kinds of things, such as inclusion of LGBT older adults at the stage of design of programming, not as an afterthought. Accommodation is never sufficient when we're talking about inclusion. It must be a fundamental thought from the very beginning. The second thing is the inclusion of LGBT older adults themselves in the design of policies and services to support them. For many, many to us LGBTQ older adults, policy has been something that has been done to them, often with horrific results, rather than something which includes them fundamentally. We have to change that. I'm gonna skip intergenerational solidarity because I wanna end on that. And the other thing is training service providers in LGBT affirming care. So in Canada, right now, there is no medical school in the country that requires training in LGBT competency. Some medical schools offer an optional course, but it's not required for anyone. We need to ensure that LGBT older adults have access to affirming care wherever they are, whether that's in the home, in the hospital, or in a long-term care facility. On that note, there is only one facility in Canada which is targeted specifically at LGBT older adults. And I want to end on the note of intergenerational solidarity. A thing that kept coming up in my research was how clearly it was that I was being related to, not as a researcher, but as a younger member of the community. The ways in which people interacted with me made that extremely clear. There are these rich and important opportunities for intergenerational solidarity and world building if we build those spaces. They have to exist, particularly at a time now when we are seeing sort of a global reactionary swing against the hard-fought gains that so many LGBT people have made over the last few years. The laws we are hearing about in the United States, where teachers are being fired for saying they are gay, not permitting the discussion of homosexuality or transgender identity in schools, that's equivalent to Section 28 in the UK under the Thatcher government, which similarly banned the discussion of homosexuality. And laws which fire teachers, many of my participants had intimate experience with 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It is vital that we build these spaces so that everyone has access to living and aging well, regardless of their identity. Thank you.
I'm not good at sitting still or standing still. Rest is rust, motion is lotion, move it or lose it. We've heard those phrases before, and I'm going to tell you what they mean. Over the last 100 years, we've added 30 plus years to our average life expectancy. What we haven't added is the equivalent amount of health. So our health span has not kept up with our lifespan. This has created a massive change in our society a massive change economically, a massive change on healthcare levels, and a massive change in housing and other policies. The question is, what are we going to do about this? These are the leading causes of mortality of men in Canada. It probably surprises some people that cancer is number one. It has been for several years, and it's the same in women. You might be saying, I thought that heart disease was number one. And it is in most other countries. And it's not because less people are getting heart disease, it's that we're very good at treating it, so you end up dying of cancer. One of the things that we do know is as soon as you get your first chronic disease, and there are lots of them up here, number two follows pretty close on the heels of number one. The story is not that much different for women. Still cancer is number one, and even if you add cerebrovascular, so stroke and heart disease together, cancer still beats it. In fact, as good a job as we've done in treating things like breast cancer and prostate cancer, most of those people will end up dying earlier of cardiovascular disease, so you get the flip side of things as well. But it's not just about mortality, because that's holding constant at 100%. So there's nothing we can do about that. So surely it's about how you spend your time while you're here. And that has something to do, I think, with quality of life. And when we talk about health span and we talk about quality of life, one thing that we do know is that all of those chronic diseases are associated with a reduction in quality of life. So obviously the idea is trying to avoid them if we can. Lifestyle works extremely well. The hard part is getting people to do it. So clearly what we need is to find out what we need to do to get people to do the things that we're telling them to do. Dr. Breen's already told you, sitting around being inactive is not an option. This is what you can expect. This is leisure time physical activity. Doesn't matter about the units. We're not a first-year physiology class. The bottom line that you want to take away here is that your hazard ratio or your chance in the next period of 5, 10, 15, 20 years of mortality is reduced. This is the years of life gained. And I want you to imagine the headline in the Spectator or the Globe and Mail that we invented a pill that's associated with, this is where the physical activity guidelines are, an extra 4 years of life. I would not be here. I would be Skyping in from Tahiti saying, this is my pill, I've invented it, we're all good. So what can we do for cancer? Most people sort of think, well, there's probably not much you can do. These are the 26 most common types of cancer. The red line there delineates the risk of dying of cancer if you're physically active. Anything that shifted to the left means a reduction in risk. So 13 out of the 26 most common types of cancer are alleviated in terms of risk if you're physically active. What about dementia and Alzheimer's? This is one I think we'd all like to avoid. And similar benefits in terms of function, all around the horn here, and in terms of survivability, or in terms of not actually becoming or contracting dementia or Alzheimer's disease. People are interested also in strength. That's the area of research that I do. And one of the things that's probably been strongly ingrained in people is that it's really important to be physically active. Get up and go for a walk, and that's great advice. And I won't say that you shouldn't do it. But at some point in your life, it's going to be important to be strong. You're sitting in a chair like this that doesn't have any arms, so you can't push up. You can't use your tricep muscle. And you want to be able to use the power in those thigh muscles that Dr. Breen told you you lose so quickly when you're in bed rest. And that's the need to be strong, because when you can't do that, you're probably going to be in full-time institutionalized care. To show you another surprising benefit of strength, this is the risk in men of mortality, both all-cause and cancer-related, if you're in the lower third versus the upper third. So if you're the weakest third of people here, your risk is much greater for cancer and all-cause mortality. For strength, it's simply a biomarker of what it is that you do and how you choose to spend your leisure time. I'm going to give a shout out because there's a booth outside to Embolden about a truly learning experience for me, and one of which I'm immensely proud. I did my undergraduate at McMaster. I didn't know that I would ever come back, but here I am 24 years later. I've had 3 sons. I certainly, in McMaster Hospital, I certainly consider myself a Hamiltonian. So I couldn't be more proud of my involvement in what's called the Embolden Project. For those of you that know a little bit about Hamilton, it's a tale of definitely 1 or 2 different cities, but you're probably familiar with the concept of what's called the Code Red in Hamilton, about neighborhoods in Hamilton that don't have the same access to activities and can't navigate social environments. So what do we do for these individuals? And it's been enormously gratifying to work with a great group of researchers and in something facilitated by the McMaster Institute for Research and Aging. But one of the cornerstones, and I'm really happy to say this, is to get these people to be more physically active. But it's hard to be more physically active if you don't live in a built environment, like we just heard from Robin, our first speaker, that doesn't have a park. Or worse yet, that has a park, but you don't feel safe in that park. Green spaces are important, blue spaces are important, but we need to get older people there. Social isolation is an issue, so how do we facilitate that? That's what we're trying to do with Embolden. This is Ron Davis, sadly not a particularly successful ager. He died of cancer quite young, but he said this, and I think we can all agree, if we had a pill that contained all of the benefits of exercise, it would be the most widely prescribed drug in the world. I think exercise is the wrong version. All the benefits of physical activity. Is the most viable foundation for active aging being physically active? I'm not sure that it's everything, but I think it's a very big part. The problem is you have to move. Okay, so before we continue, everybody, I just want you to stand up out of your seats to take a standing break from all the sitting we've been doing. Stretch a little bit, move around a little bit. Doesn't that feel good? I know, it feels good, doesn't it? Okay, you can take a seat. Thank you very much.
Okay. Proud of everybody who doesn't need notes. I just probably don't need notes either, but if I didn't have notes, I would talk forever. That's the problem. Okay. So now scano ga. Nigiatso Lorrie Gallant, Niwa Coinzidan, Gaikono, Haudenosaunee. So hello, my name is Lorrie Gallant. I am Cayuga Nation from Six Nations of the Grand. Inclusive spaces. When I was first asked, I wondered why I was asked to present. And I thought, everything that you know, everything everybody else is presenting is really important. It's key. And I felt if I could add something, it would be the spirituality of growing old, of aging, and how important that is too. And I thought about inclusive and what it means, and that it means to embrace all people, different races, ages, ability. We have to embrace them and hold them and make space for them, accept them, making everything accessible. And then I thought about space. And it's not just the width and the length and the depth of a place. It's the breadth. It's everything in between. It's not the walls of a place that's important. It's everything inside. And I think, who's allowed inside? Who can come inside? How do you come and fill this space? What do we fill the space with? And so I started to think how much we've become aware of space, especially since COVID. It's clearly marked on the floor, you know, how far apart you should be or how close you can be. Do you remember when we weren't allowed to hug each other? And how much your body literally ached? Mine did. My body ached to hold and hug somebody, a friend. And then what it felt like when you could. It was like the most glorious feeling ever to hold somebody and to take in that space and fill that space with what that energy between two people can create. So just looking around, you know, before there'd be a chair in between everybody. And now we can sit next to each other. It feels nice to be next to somebody, to be aware of the space and the people that are allowed into your space and fill it. So that's what I thought about when I thought about this. And then I thought that the people that we need to consider in growing old or aging well, we think that we need to understand people. So this is a woman from Six Nations, Helen Hill. And all the images I'm using are from a project that I did with grade 8 students and elders within the community. They spent time with them, they interviewed them, they wrote a story about them, and then they had a photo shoot with them, which was great for everybody. And it connected them, that delicate balance in between the youth and the elders within our community. And Six Nations is Haudenosaunee, so we are a community that lives together, and we always have. Before colonization, we lived in communities covered by a palisade around us, lived in longhouses. That's what Haudenosaunee means, people of the longhouse. And in those longhouses would live about 100 people. And there'd be like 10, 20, 30, 40 of those longhouses. So it was community. We took care of each other, we gardened together, we took care of each other's children. You know, women would care for each other's children the way that, as if they were their very own children. There was always elders there around the fire to tell stories. And this is the way that we lived. And I think that's important, to live that way in community. So Helen Hill, she's an author. She wrote a book called Shake the Rattle, Healing the Trauma of Colonization. She's a poet. You can see some of her artwork there. And this one, it says the wise ones, the ones that have something to share with us. They teach us how to conduct ourselves, how to contribute to the community, how to survive and live a good life. This is Jan Longboat. She's Turtle Mohawk. She's an educator, a writer, an herbalist, a cultural advocate, a natural health practitioner, and a member of the Order of Canada. Elders hold keys. They hold the key of how we should live in our own communities, how we should treat each other. They are an important connection to the past. They're a living connection to the past. If I spent many summers with my great-grandmother. She took care of me while my mother worked in the tobacco fields. And so she would care for me, and she would tell me stories about her siblings and her parents and her grandparents. She was connecting me to 3 generations, 4 generations past me. She told me stories that I could only collect from her. So that was important for that connection. So they're living connections to the past. An elder's role is essential for the survival of a community, for a survival of the culture. Jan is, she's 85 years old, and when she speaks, sometimes she says, when the old ones would tell me, what the old ones was used to say. So she's connecting us to hundreds of years of information. This is Ione Anderson. She passed away in 2018. She traveled the world promoting Indigenous gardening and food preparation from original seeds. Traditional knowledge comes from the Creator, and elders have learned by interacting with the environment around them and people around them for their entire lives. It's called collective knowledge. They collect that knowledge, and their role in life is to pass that knowledge on to the next generation. And so aging well comes with your purpose. Why are you here? What are you doing? What is your purpose in life? And what is your connection to everything that's around you? Each elder carries a unique gift. Some of them teach you about gardening. Some of them teach you about sports. Some of them teach you about hunting. Some of them teach you songs and dance and art. Everyone has something to give. So an elder's role is essentially to give survival skills to a community, to a culture. This is Tom Hill. He's an artist, and he is the very first Indigenous curator in Canada. And he has the Governor General Award, He sings. He is an artist himself, a curator, and he's curated museums in Paris and Germany, all across Canada and the United States. He would sit and tell me stories about meeting Princess Diana, having dinner with her. And I asked him, you ask you these unique things from people that you wouldn't know where they had been. So this is one of the reasons to connect the youth to the elders, to respect where they've come from and the stories that they've gathered from their experiences in their lives. So this is Steve Smith. He's a potter. So elders need space to fulfill their goals. Aging means growing old. Elder means a person with experience because of their age. In Haudenosaunee languages, there is no word for elder. We use the word elder in its place, but we have words like Yiti Yahweh. And Yiti Yahweh means those who have something to share with us. So when we refer to our elders, it's a moment to listen. We're not talking about somebody who's old. It has nothing to do with age and everything to do with wisdom. So we call them knowledge keepers, knowledge holders, teachers, grandmothers, grandfathers, grandparents, aunties, and uncles. Traditional knowledge comes from art, history. It comes from the past, it comes from the present, and it should be carried to the future. We have to embrace all of this with our hearts. This is a picture of Billy Squire. He passed away in 2019. He's in the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame. He's a knowledge keeper, an activist. He was a land protector. So we learn from them. We learn from their life experiences, who they were when they were young, and they once sat and listened to their elders, and they carried their words forward to us so that we can hear those words, so that I can share those words to my children and to my grandchildren and to my great-grandchildren, hopefully. And if we don't listen, then we don't honor them. If we don't respect them, then we're going to miss out. And so aging well for Indigenous communities is the connection that you have to have with the past. It's a cycle that can't be broken. So I want to talk about this one thing, just an artifact. So I used to work at Woodland Cultural Center Museum, so as the education coordinator, and they had thousands of arrowheads, drawers and drawers and drawers of them, because I asked to borrow it for a lesson. And she said, take whichever you want. And I thought, aren't they important? And she said, no, they're not. We have so many of them. So I asked an archaeologist, why is, an arrowhead that's been donated to the museum not important? And she said, because it's not the arrowhead that tells the story. She goes, it's all the ground around it that it's found. Wherever you found it, how deep in the ground it was the earth blackened? Was there a fire there? Was it found on a hill? Was it found in a forest? Was it found in a cornfield? She said, it's not the artifact that has the stories to tell. It's the environment that it grows up in. So the connection you have to the land and the connection you have to the community is where the stories are. And the usefulness of an elder is what we need from them. What is in the space that we give to them? How do we get into the space? What do we take from that space? What do we need? We need to survive. We need connection to survive. We need connection to the land, connection to the youth, connection to community. Connections is where we survive and where we flourish and where we use our gifts and tell our stories. So for me, that aging well is about being connected to your family, to your children, to your community, having purpose, and that is to carry the gifts that you have to the next generation. I'm in the middle. I know my mother. I know my grandmother. I've spent time with my great-grandmother. I have children. I have grandchildren. How many generations have I pulled together that I can take my great-grandmother's story and tell it to my grandson? So that's important to me, and that's how we live on forever. Thank you.
I feel like I might do a bit of crooning. So as I proudly put up here, I am a neuroscientist, and Stu and Leigh have actually have set the scene for me very, very well. So I'm a neuroscientist. I'm interested in how the brain controls movement. And I'm interested in that because I'm a bit of a chauvinist about this. I think the brain was evolved for one thing and one thing only, and that is movement. So most animals don't really care about the other things that we do. Most animals just move, and that's what the brain is for. And I hope you like this brain. It's a very, very beautiful brain. This is my brain. So this is a 3D reconstruction of an MRI scan. So it's a series of slices of the brain which are then reconstructed to make the three-dimensional figure and then cut down the middle. And brains are like fingerprints. You can recognize them when you see them. And this is definitely my brain. There's a little kink in the middle of the corpus callosum, which is my particular kind of, I think, thing. But the important about this is that this image was taken 10, 15 years ago. And as you can see from this brain, it's nice and plump. Kind of all the grooves are kind of, the hillocks are very, very hillocky, and there's no, the sulci, the valleys are very kind of filled in. If we had this image again now, you would probably see that the brain has got a little bit smaller, and it's not quite as plump, the valleys have got wider and deeper, because like everything in our bodies, the brain gets less efficient and some of the neural tissue disappears as we get older. I mean, when this image was taken, I actually had hair, believe it or not. Anyway, so as I say, I've been set up here. So I'm going to ask a question. I know there's two members of the panel have already answered it. Well, I know they've got a certain idea about it. So what's going to help us move better as we age? Is it going to be brain? As this aging Albert Einstein, as we know, he's got proper skills when it comes to the brain area, or is it this chap over here who's showing off his undoubted weeks or years in the gym? So what is it? Well, is it just muscle mass that's important, or is it actual brain health that is important? And we can start to address this question by giving the case for brawn. Lee's, as I say, already set me up. So you can see here if you do a simple experiment, you measure the forearm of any individual. We know from mass data that we can predict how much the circumference, or any given circumference of a forearm, how much grip strength that should be able to produce, right? And so up the side here, we've got grip strength in kilograms. And you can see, as Leigh pointed out, you get to about 30, it's about as much muscle mass as you're ever going to have. And that's when you're going to have the maximum amount of grip strength. But as you get older, the muscle mass will get smaller, and because it gets smaller, you will start to lose the grip strength, right? And as Stu's pointed out, these are very big indicators of loss of strength. Is an indicator of many things about frailty and poor health consequences. But as you can see, it's not a steep curve. It drops off, it goes up as you get to about 30, and then it begins to taper off as you lose muscle mass. But it's not this isn't a dramatic loss of strength in any way. So it doesn't seem that worrying. But the thing is, if we actually, instead of looking at predicted strength, we look at real strength. So instead of measuring the circumference of the arm, we get somebody to use a dynamometer. So a hand dynamometer is just a simple device which allows you to measure how much grip strength someone has. You can see the decline is much steeper. So you get the same relationship that as between 20 and 30, you get an increase in strength, and you can become as strong as you're possibly going to be at the age of 30. And then it drops off, and it drops off quite quickly. So it seems to be a very different story to the predicted amount of amount of strength, and the predicted amount of strength loss you have just from the muscle mass alone. And for the observant among you, you're going to see there's an interesting relationship between these two curves. And that's this. So there's something kind of interesting going on here, right? Because in the early part of your life, up to about the 5th decade, so about my age essentially, you produce more grip strength than you should be able to, given the amount of muscle you have. And then when you get to about the mid-50s, that relationship switches. So you go to a point where instead of you start to produce less strength than you should be able to do, given the amount of muscle you have. So something's going on here, right? And it's not just about muscle. And the answer is quite clear in that figure at the bottom of the graph. That's thankfully not my brain, but that is just an older brain. There's nothing wrong with that brain, it's just an older brain. And you can see the ventricles in the middle, which are the part of the brain that has where the cerebrospinal fluid is. It's the stuff that bathes the rest of the brain and keeps it kind of sitting around healthy. They've increased in size. And the sulcus and gyri around the edge, as I said, they become larger as you lose brain matter. And so that's what's going on inside your head, and that's probably what is causing this dramatic decrease in your ability to produce strength in older age. Because even simple things like a maximal grip strength, so just squeezing as hard as you can with your hand, is a really, really complex motor control problem. Your hand is probably the most complex mechanism in the animal kingdom. Inside your hand, you have many, many bones. You have the intrinsic muscles of the hands, then the muscles up here which control the tendons that give you the force. And so all of these muscles are controlled by different neural populations, which are controlled by different neural populations in your brain. And to produce a complex kind of movement like this, you have to coordinate dozens and dozens of synergies of muscles. And as soon as they start to get out of kind of whack, if they start to not quite operate in the same way with the similar amount of coordinated neural stuff, then that's when you're going to start to have problems. So, my last slide, so just in time. So I'm not laying claim that it's just brains, but I am saying that, as you can see, that's not Leigh's slide. I didn't steal it, but it's a similar slide. You can see that you have both the brain and the muscles deteriorate as we age, and anything that can actually produce or stop those, as they've talked about, protein and exercise, that's certainly going to help reduce the loss of muscle mass. But we also need to think about how we can reduce the amount of brain loss. And these are simple things like using brain exercises. And so things like Sudoku, exercise, or anything that will keep you going, will also keep your brain healthy, and your brain health will affect your movement health. And I think we can also say that things like exercise and all the other things will also help your brain health. So I think the answer is, although we don't know how these communicate well together, and we're going to work on that as a project we're actually starting in our department, we think that the things that will actually help one structure will also help the other structure. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Brenda Vrkljan from the School of Rehabilitation Science, and I took this picture on our holiday Monday, just this past Monday. I'm going to take you a little bit backwards a few days. You remember the weather was very nice, and it's the day we celebrate Queen Victoria's birthday every year for our British guests. We lovingly refer to it as May 24, and there's a reason for that. We like 24 beer, just so you guys know. Ladies and gentlemen, so all of that to say, I was in the Dundas driving park, and I couldn't help myself but look around. And of course, a picture never does this park justice, because there's sights and sounds and smells and being with people. And it's a wonderful place to be on weekends and holidays. If the weather's right in Canada, of course, you'll find us outside. Now, if we turn a little bit and pan that camera to the right, it's not really about the park. We can all agree that the park is a wonderful place to be and to be with others, as we've heard from our guests. But it's how we get to these places that we need to talk about, and somebody's already mentioned that before. So it is called Dundas Driving Park, and it's not because people drive, but now we have to drive to get to this park because there is no bus, actually. Just so you know, there's no bus to this wonderful place. The closest bus stop is about nearly a kilometer away, and the walk to this park is not an easy one if you were to do it from Main Street in Dundas. Let's take a cab. Well, from where we are right now to be able to get to that place, it's about $30 when it's busy. That's 15 pounds. I tried to look it up. That's not cheap one way. I don't think even 15 pounds is quite a bit of money. So I ask you, is this park an inclusive place? Is it affordable? And these are some questions I'm going to challenge you with a little bit. So yes, it's about mobility, but it's also about inclusive mobility, and why does that matter? So we want to think about the definitions of mobility and what that means, and then we want to take that a step further and really think about the scope of mobility. So This is a definition. It's about 20 years ago that it came forward from the World Health Organization, the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health. And it's a really comprehensive definition of mobility. You can see it includes moving around, from moving your limbs and your arms and your hands, and all the way through to using various forms of transportation. But what's important about this definition is it took going beyond the individual and the health condition, which we often think about, and we know with age, we can experience more than one health condition, as we've seen on some of the slides, but it really thought about the role of the environment and its implications. So when we try to think about mobility and mobility problems, it actually gets really complex when we start to drill down in terms of why these issues arise with age. And so one of the challenges with the ICF is that just the complexity of trying to understand the reasons why people have mobility problems. So we have colleagues at the University of Manitoba, that's further away from here, out west, and they leveraged that initial definition and have looked at it with an aging lens. What we'll appreciate is it does consider the use of assistive devices, which is important, and transportation. But it actually takes it one step further in terms of thinking about our environment, and also thinking about it's not just how we move around our house and our rooms and out into the community, as we saw with the Dundas driving park, but it also talks about the determinants. And so when we think about the cost, you can see financial there, the cost to be able to get to a place like the Dundas driving park. That's where we question whether is the issue really within the person, and is it about the environment then that has implications on people's mobility? So our first guest is also an occupational therapist. Isn't that wonderful to be amongst like-minded people here in our panel? It's not often we have panels with two OTs, so that's really wonderful. But we talk about the term occupation, and what we're talking about is all the things that occupy people's time. So the things that you need to do, want to do, and are expected to do. And we know that when you're able to do those things, when you have purpose, that really brings meaning to life and health and well-being. So of course, we ask people to eat right, to exercise, to look after themselves. And yes, walking and using assistive devices is important, but we really want to think about the scope of mobility. And there's a project that I'm a part of here, also funded by the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging, called the MAC-M3, which is monitoring my mobility. And my colleague who's leading the project is here in the audience. And so it's all about trying to understand how people move around their environments. But I ask you, if we get off at a bus stop and we've optimized people's mobility and they've eaten right and they've done all those things and kept up their strength and not stayed in their pajamas, if they get off at the bus stop here and it's a sidewalk, there's no sidewalk, it's a bus stop to nowhere, we ask ourselves, is the mobility problem on them, or does everybody have a mobility problem? We do get snow here in Canada, as our British guests know. And so this is another example of when our council just passed that they're actually going to try to clear the sidewalks more in the winter. And so somebody has aptly put here on the tweet that every single one of these corners is completely inaccessible to anyone with mobility issues. And so we need to think about our environment. And unfortunately, we've had a rash of pedestrian deaths here, collisions, pedestrian vehicle collisions, and it's really upsetting since the start of the year. In fact, the Hamilton Spectator, our local paper, has a special feature right now called Unsafe Streets, and it's all about tracking. So I ask you, is it, again, the person that has a mobility problem, or do we all have a mobility problem? So it's all about the transaction between the environment and the person. And these are the things that we need to be thinking about and we need to leverage. So I have a friend that just visited the UK, Cornwall, and look at that lovely pedestrian-only area. And don't we love that? We love that in Canada. And we don't have them. We rarely have them. In fact, we have to shut down streets. So I see the Westdale is having their artisan parade soon, or whatever it is, where they close down the main area and everybody congregates. And of course, we'll be wearing masks and all of those things, but it's great to be with others. We need bright benches, and why can't they be bright? Why do they have to be brown and ugly? So all of that to say that this is something we can learn. We're not saying that the UK gets everything right, but there are things that we need to be thinking about and we can learn from others. So I'll close with that. Thank you very much.
Hello. I'm Jill Axisa, and I'm really enthusiastic about being here with you today as co-founder of the local chapter of Cycling Without Age, and to share the story of our journey so far. Many of you are researchers with lots of evidence-based answers to the age-old question, just what is it that keeps people young? Is the recipe energy, exercise, engagement? Could the secret ingredient be enthusiasm? In 2018, Nancy Gray approached me with an idea and a whole lot of enthusiasm and asked me to be her tandem partner in this adventure. I just knew I had to hop on for the ride. Nancy had become captivated by a program that was international in scope with chapters across Canada, and she wanted my help to open a chapter in Hamilton and Burlington. With ample evidence of the benefits of lifelong activity, Cycling Without Age was engaging seniors and other individuals with mobility challenges by encouraging them to safely return to or discover the joys of cycling. Passengers are seated in the front of a specially designed trishaw, which is like a backward rickshaw tricycle. They are pedaled by trained volunteer pilots, and often the exhilarating experience of the ride, as described by the passengers, is really led to the CWA's model to say and declare that you're right to have wind through your hair. What might at first glance be passive involvement for the passenger, this can actually require a significant amount of energy to get to and from the location as well as on and off the trishaw. If you've ever met Nancy before, I would describe her as an Energizer bunny disguised as an accountant. She's been relentless in her quest to bring this to our region. She understood how critical collaborations and partnerships would be, including fostering connections with McMaster and its researchers in aging and health. The chapter she imagined was going to excite and inspire an active and healthy society. For those who already embrace an active lifestyle, aging is inevitable, but you never know when a health hiccup may hit, leaving you unable to do those activities that you love. Or, if you've never been especially active, this inclusive and accessible program could provide a safe starting point for you to begin your path. We determined that CWA's local launch would be propelled by community-engaged enthusiasm among partners and participants and volunteers. But then my own life shifted gears. I get the irony that CWA's motto is the right to wind in your hair. My new do is a courtesy of cancer, round 2. 10 years ago, I was a multiple marathon runner, just qualified for my second trip to Boston. I got my first diagnosis, started treatments a few months before the race day. Anyway, against everyone's advice and even a few professional opinions, I went. Was it the smartest thing I've ever done? Perhaps not. I didn't run that marathon well, but I ran it with enthusiasm. Mid-treatment, bald, and sporting on the back of my shirt, words which then my teenage daughter had written. My PB this year is beating cancer. PB is a runner's lingo for personal best. And what happened in that race, which was pretty cool, is a lot of runners caught up to me with lots of words and stories of encouragement. They told me that I was kicking cancer's ass. My recovery was strong, I powered ahead with my life, and for the most part, things got back to normal. I have to say, the second go-round with cancer is a lot more demoralizing than the first. This time, there certainly have been days when cancer has felt like it's kicking my ass. I had to take a seat and watch from the sidelines as Nancy and her collaborators, partners, volunteers pedaled on. Now, Nancy's running joke is that in 20 years, she sees herself sitting in the front seat of the trishaw. But I realize that that can be me at any time. Once a runner, then a walker. Now I need a lift some days. CWA is an option to get out and active. The initiatives start focused on active aging, but the possibilities are endless to enhance the quality of life for those with limited mobility, which captures a wide age range, and including those living with catastrophic accidents or illnesses. So about the bike. Trishaws are specialized e-bikes built in Holland by Van Ram, and there just happens to be a local dealer called Hamilton Trikes. Thanks to generous donors, we now have 2 Trishaws. And you may have noticed one of our beautiful bikes as you walked into the lobby this evening. They are electric assisted and hold 2 passengers plus a pilot. With extra safety features, bench seating, a rain or sun hood, and actually they have really great fitted insulated blankets, so we've taken people out in the winter. It's been quite a lot of fun. The cost for a bike, including delivery, is approximately 15,000 Canadian. The pilots are trained and certified, taught some safety features, and also the routes in both the Hamilton and Burlington communities. We cannot overstate the importance of partnerships and collaborations, and CWA would not be operating in this community if it wasn't for our pal Tammy, shown here, taking a well-deserved front seat. She's on the staff of New Hope Community Bikes, a local not-for-profit that is a learning hub for building and repairing bikes, offering safe cycling education, providing access to affordable transportation, and fostering a rich and inclusive cycling community. They had wanted to expand their programming to the senior demographic and are helping us with our insurance, donor receipts, as well as the bike ownership and maintenance. We also have a wide range of community agencies that have worked with us to successfully implement programming outdoor for their own clients. Leander Boat Club is an important provider that gives us valuable storage for our Trishaw. It also allows us to use its facilities in the property so we can do our training, and also it helps with a starting point for the riders to come and get on the bike and go for the cruise in the Trishaw. Just last week, the Burlington Seniors Center offered space in its facility on Drury Street. So now we have a home for our second Trishaw. And we're hoping that we'll be able to take Burlington residents for rides sometime in late June. And of course, without funders and donors, we wouldn't be on this path at all. Beyond aging and permanent disability, this could be a game changer for people recovering from serious medical conditions or injuries. Through collaboration, the possibilities are endless to support individuals who are living with critical diseases such as MS, ALS, RA, and cancer. And beyond the bike, there are similar concepts that exist in other sports, such as downhill skiing. And of course, the engine that drives all of this are enthusiastic volunteers. They provide pedal power, they provide socialization, engagement, and they bring their own stories and experience to that experience for the rider. Truly meaningful. Conversations between the rider and the pilot support a lot of mental health and also well-being. If the pandemic has taught us anything during the past few years, we've learned the devastating effects of isolation. Passengers describe a new sense of purpose and freedom. Positive physical, psychological, social impact. New stories, friendships, hope. And feeling valued and like being part of society again. So the path from here? We continue the quest for collaboration in both cities, expanding our volunteer and agency partnerships. And Nancy would give me the look, and I don't want the look, Nancy, if I didn't share her call for action. Partner with us, volunteer with us, bring a senior, bring a friend who has a mobility challenge, and send your money. I started and shared a lot of quotes about the importance of enthusiasm as part of a call to action for engaged aging. It was Henry Thomas Thoreau who said, "None are so old as those who have outlived enthusiasm." Picture this, if you will. You're walking along Bayfront Park on a glorious summer morning, and this giant tricycle approaches. There's two giggling seniors in the front, on the bench, having a great time. They've never met each other till today, but they're talking a mile a minute. They're waving to the children. They're smiling at those geese scuttling out of the way. They're watching the sailboats out on the water, and they're saying hello to everyone that passes by. And the wind is blowing through their hair. Enthusiasm is out there. Thank you.
So we've heard some wonderful speakers this evening, and we don't want them to get off the hook that easily. So now we are going to ask them some questions. So we are going to open the mic, and there are people here with mics here who are going to be coming to you. And if there are questions, there's a question right here. There's a mic for you there.
Oh, sorry. On the other side there.
And building muscles with exercise, is that enough just by itself? Or should we be using anabolic steroids or other anabolic agents? Stu?
Are there any other questions? Don't be shy. Marla.
Hi. Thanks, everyone, for your wonderful talks. I just wanted to maybe pose this comment for the panel. What about unstructured exercise? Because we've talked a lot about, very specific structured exercise to build strength and cognitive activities. But what about just getting out and doing regular daily activities or what we would consider light physical activity? What kind of impact does that have?
Go ahead.
And if possible, try and incorporate something more structured on top of that. But without doubt, the most important thing you could do is move. And as Stu mentioned, at some point in your life, you will need to be strong. You will need a reserve of muscle mass to protect you during those crisis moments. And so the guidelines aren't that stringent. 2 or more times a week, a minimum of 2 times a week, engaged in some form of strengthening exercise. And what that looks like isn't necessarily a conventional gym setting. As Stu mentioned, standing up and down a few times is the most important functional exercise you can do as you age, the ability to rise and sit back down into a chair again. Maybe coincide it around meal times as well, so you get the effect of the exercise and the nutrition. That would be my best advice.
Is there a follow-up question?
No, I was just going to say, there is some studies. I just, want for everyone in the audience to kind of think about. There are a lot of studies to show that even really unstructured exercise, daily activities that we do in our daily lives, can make a really big impact, even on your things like your length of stay. So even if you're in the hospital and you're not doing any specific rehab, if you just get up and walk with a family member, or get up to take your meals, as someone had suggested, that actually makes a really big difference in terms of your health and your risk for readmission down the line. So just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Comment?
Thanks, Marla, for raising that. And as an occupational therapist, that's what I was trying to convey with the tone, like the notion of occupation. But I can tell you, my mom does art, right? She's an artist. And is she an exerciser? She wouldn't call herself an exerciser. But what's interesting about art is she does have to get into and out of a chair. She has to get dressed. She has to get ready. She has to move around. She has to be on her toes cognitively, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a lot of hidden benefits to everyday activities that we like and what we call occupations. Now, this notion of pushing threshold, Stu et al. On the panel here, is an important one, right? Because, so now my mom goes in the garden. That's what she was bragging about to me today before I came. She was in the garden and she worked, and yes, your father went to the gym at Pace at McMaster and enjoyed that, but she doesn't like that. So she's in the garden, bending, stooping, doing all of those things. So, so I really appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, I'm holding 2 mics. I have something really important to say. No? I just wanted to comment on Sophie's presentation. Sophie, that was excellent. You did a great job. And I think this is something we really haven't started to think and talk about, that certain things, aging itself, there's a lot of ageism already. And if you are from a minority group, whether it's LGBTQ+ or any type of minority group, the aging even becomes harder. And this is where, as a society, as a culture, as groups, we actually have to do a better job in promoting healthy aging for everyone, not just for who are part of the mainstream community. And it is challenging, and it becomes even harder if they go to long-term care, institutionalized settings. And I think that's the message that we really have to resonate. But one tip for you, we do have one of the largest data sets in Canada that collects data on LGBTQ, called the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging. So I have to do that plug here. Your application is in. That's great. I just wanted to say something else, which you mentioned about purpose, right? And I have a family member right now who lives in Ottawa. He's 90 years of age. He has no health problems, but developed an arthritic infection in the knee. And because of lack of attention, that became sepsis, ended up in the hospital. And they had to do bit of a perfusion, but he can't move. And part of it is he has been a very active person all his life, intellectually, mentally, not necessarily physically. All of a sudden, he has lost purpose in his life. He doesn't know what he's supposed to do. He will not agree to a rehab program right now. There's not a motivation in him that he wants to do any rehab because he doesn't feel purpose why he should do it. He's looking for a magic bullet that's going to fix him. Then he will think about what he needs to do. I think with all of this that we've been talking, at the end of the day, there is something inside us that drives us. We are going to be able to do activity or engage in our social participation. We need to have a purpose. And that's another thing that we have to make sure that we create purpose in people's lives. And purpose can be created through stories, through engagement, through community. And I think we are losing that a lot, and pandemic hasn't helped that. And so all of the inclusiveness is built on some of the things we really feel important to us, and how do we get that out? That will make a big impact. That was just my little spiel here. Any other questions, comments, suggestions, reactions to our speakers? Don't be shy. We are all friends here. I can come and pick someone and say, what do you think? You want me to do that? I'm notorious for that. I know there are some neighbors from my neighborhood. I'm going to come and talk to them. Hi, how are you? This is Alison Dubé, one of our staff members there, her parents. Want to say something? Want to say something to Alison?
No, Pat's the talker.
Hi, baby. So all I would say about street safety is not terrific. I think the city needs to be engaged in making things safer for us, particularly intersections on main streets, which we live very close to. The lights don't allow for very much time in crossing. Makes it really, really unsafe for slow people.
For any people.
For any people, yes.
And Hamilton is known for its one-way streets, where it takes a while to cross the street and the lights change really, really fast and creates a lot of danger. No other questions, no comments? So, well, if not, then I'm going to move on to next part of the agenda. That is to, oh, there's a question.
Where was it? Was it here? Yeah.
So if you study people who who've had some degeneration in their brain, and then they go and they do an exercise program over a period of time, do you notice changes in the brain structure?
You won't notice changes in the brain structure, but there are Parkinson's disease is one I know particularly. People do things like CrossFit and exercise regimes with people with Parkinson's. They do see great benefits from it, so that their symptoms will be ameliorated by exercise, but you won't see changes in the brain.
My sister has Parkinson's.
So so there's quite a lot of evidence. CrossFit, dancing is also one of the very popular one that seems to work very well with people with Parkinson's too. It's, I think, additional to the rhythmicity of the actual, which helps them to move during the actual exercise.
I just wanted to make a comment. Dancing was mentioned. A long, good series on TVO concluded that dancing is one of the best things to engage your brain, coordination, and activity, and it is difficult. And one program I saw was in New York, and they had a program called Dances for a Variable Population. So you didn't have to know how to dance. You just moved with music, with people, complete strangers in a park. And I think it took away a lot of the intimidation as opposed to salsa classes, etc. So I'd like to see that happen here.
That there is through the McMaster Institute for Research Aging in collaboration with JARS, which is a clinical research unit in one of the Hamilton Health Sciences, they actually created a dance program intervention for frail population, and it has now gone on to expand it to other parts of the country. So it has been very successful. So there are quite a few, thinking about Parkinson's disease, there's a group here at McMaster where they have used the dance movements to help people with Parkinson's disease to be able to keep some of the movements going, which is again a brain-body coordination that comes into play. So there is some work happening in that space related to the dance and the dance-related movements and physical well-being. Yes, there's another question. Is it this again for Stu? Oh, okay.
This relates to the drive-in park in Dundas. It's a beautiful place. I was there that day myself. But the trouble is it highlights something. It very quickly becomes crowded on a Sunday. And there's really very little room to run around because it's just packed. How do we get enough green spaces so that people don't have to travel by bus or don't have to travel by car? It's a big issue.
It's a great comment, and I don't have an answer to it. I think we all know, right? This is the thing, we know what we need to do. It's a real conundrum, I think. It's such a complex answer to what gets prioritized. And you can say gas prices. What did I just see on the CBC? No matter what the gas price is, we're gonna drive right now. And is that because our pockets are full because of pandemic dollars? There's some discussion about that. But the driving park is a very interesting place to see all those cars lined up and then people sort of in that middle part. But that middle part is quite magical in terms of seeing the intergenerational interactions that happen. But we need more spaces like that where we can come together and be together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for all your questions and engagement, and thank you to all the speakers who have come from all over the world and all over the country to be here and share their experiences and their wisdom with us. Thanks for attending, all of you. This event wouldn't have been possible without you being here because you are the reason we are here and talking about it. And all our community partners who have supported this event and were part of our research affair. You saw their posters outside from the community, as well as some of our projects and trainees who were very actively engaged with all of you, and we thank you, all of you, for being here. Our Vice Presidents of Research Office, we want to thank them for helping us organize this event. Lorrie Gallant, who is sitting back there, wave your hand. And Jennifer Trechak, I don't know if Jennifer is here, but that's another person from the Vice President of Research Office who has helped organize this event. Birmingham planning team, in particular Gareth Wallace, and also to thank to our Birmingham speakers here. Of course, I can't end this session without thanking our McMaster Institute for Research on Aging team. And they have worked tirelessly to make this event happen. Ina Walben, where she is, right there, she just waved her hand. And Audrey Paddock, you have seen her walk around and gather everybody to come in. Audrey, Jazine Elders, Jazine, where are you? Back there. Allison Dubé, you met her parents. Where is Allison? There is Allison. Casey Irwin, who is handing mics, and he's our communication staff person. Amy Ledecour. Is Amy here today? No. And, oh, where is Amy? Oh, hi, Amy. And Alison Outram, the backbone of what we do here. She's right there. And so I again want to say thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to all our speakers for engaging with us this evening. And all the best. Thank you.